The midnight shift at the Skywatch Tower was always the loneliest. Ezarion Var stood at the observation deck, gazing at the 3 moons of Orion that hung like luminous pearls against the velvet darkness. The capital city sprawled below him, a tapestry of twinkling lights and elegant spires that stretched toward the horizon. From this height, the metropolis looked peaceful, too peaceful perhaps. Ezarion sighed, his breath fogging the ancient glass. The tower had stood for centuries, once a vital military installation when Orion still maintained a defense force worthy of the name. Now it was little more than a relic, preserved more for its historical significance than any practical purpose. And he, as its sole watchman, felt equally obsolete. His eyes drifted to the antique radar system, still humming faithfully after all these years. The technology was outdated by modern Orionian standards, yet tradition dictated that someone must always monitor the skies. A ceremonial role, they called it. Important for cultural continuity, they said. But everyone knew the truth. No one had approached Orion uninvited in over 300 years. The planet's golden age of peace had lasted so long that military vigilance seemed like a quaint anachronism. Izirion's fingers tapped lazily across the console, performing the routine system check he'd done thousands of times before. The familiar sequence brought a strange comfort, like reciting an old prayer whose meaning had been forgotten, but whose rhythm remained soothing. The scan completed with its usual result. Nothing. Just the regular commercial vessels coming and going, all properly registered, all following designated flight paths. Ezarion yawned and reached for his thermo cup, the last of his midnight CF growing cold. Then he saw it, a red blip at the edge of the system. Then another, and another. He blinked, wondering if fatigue had finally caught up with him. Recalibrating the scanner, he ran the sequence again. The red dots remained, pulsing ominously at the outer reaches of Orion's solar system. That's impossible, he whispered to the empty room. For the first time in years, Ezarion felt a surge of adrenaline. His training, rusty but still present, kicked in. He enhanced the signal, trying to get a clearer reading. The objects were maintaining formation, not the behavior of asteroids or space debris. Their trajectory was deliberate, approaching the system at a steady pace. His hand hesitated over the emergency communication panel. False alarms were not treated kindly by the administration. The last sky watcher who'd mistaken a comet for an unidentified craft had been publicly ridiculed, eventually resigning in shame. But something about these signals felt different. Wrong. The capital's inhabitants slept peacefully below, confident in their centuries of tranquility. No one believed anyone would bother with Orion anymore. Resource-poor planet, valuable only for its cultural achievements and academic institutions. They had grown complacent, content to believe that the universe had forgotten them. But Ezarion couldn't shake the certainty that something was coming, something that hadn't been invited. His finger pressed the communication button. Central Command, this is Skywatch Tower. I'm tracking multiple unidentified objects entering the system. Request verification and instructions. The response came after a long pause, a sleepy voice barely concealing its annoyance. Skywatch, this is Command. Running cross-verification now. Stand by. Ezarion waited, eyes fixed on the red blips that continued their steady approach. When the voice returned, it carried a dismissive tone that made his stomach tighten. Skywatch, Command here. Our systems show nothing unusual. Likely a sensor malfunction in your outdated equipment. Log the incident and schedule maintenance for tomorrow. But Ezarion began, only to be cut off. That will be all, Skywatch. Command out. The communication ended with a click that echoed in the silent chamber. Ezarion stared at the console, doubt creeping into his mind. Was it possible that the advanced systems at Central Command were right? Was his ancient radar malfunctioning? But as the night progressed, the red dots moved closer, their formation unmistakably purposeful. Ezarion couldn't dismiss what he was seeing. 3 centuries of peace had made Orion vulnerable, its people forgetting what it meant to be vigilant. If he was wrong, he would face ridicule. But if he was right and did nothing? By morning, Ezerion had made his decision. He would not abandon his post, regardless of what Central Command believed. As the first rays of Orion's sun touched the observation deck, he straightened his uniform, another relic from a bygone era, and prepared to make his case to the highest authority he could reach. The journey to the Capitol building took Ezerion through the heart of the capital city. The morning bustle was already in full swing, citizens going about their daily lives with no awareness of the potential threat lurking at the edges of their system. Street artists painted on public canvases, academics debated philosophy in outdoor cafes, and students hurried to their learning centers. Orion's reputation as a cultural and intellectual hub was evident in every corner of the metropolis. None of them spared a second glance for the man in the antiquated Sky Watcher uniform. Why would they? His kind was a curiosity, a living museum piece. The Capitol building rose like a crystalline mountain at the city center, its transparent walls refracting the morning light into 1,000 rainbow patterns. Security was minimal, another sign of the times, and Ezerion found himself in the grand reception hall with little difficulty. "I need to speak with President Narian Rao," he said to the receptionist, who looked up from her console with mild surprise. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked, her eyes lingering on his outdated uniform. "No, but this is urgent. It concerns planetary security." The woman's expression shifted from surprise to amusement. "Planetary security? I see. And you are?" "Ezerion Var, Sky Watcher, Northern Tower Division." Her fingers tapped across her screen. "I'm afraid the president is in meetings all day. Perhaps you could speak with a junior representative?" Ezerion leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Please, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't important. There are unidentified vessels approaching our system, and Central Command is dismissing my reports." The humor faded from her eyes, replaced by something closer to pity. "I'll see what I can do." After an hour of waiting, Ezerion was not granted an audience with the president, but rather with his chief of staff, a thin man named Verai, who wore his impatience like a badge of honor. "Sky Watcher Var," Verai said, not bothering to look up from his data pad as Ezerion entered his office. "I understand you have concerns about aerial phenomena, spacecraft," Ezerion corrected. "Multiple vessels in formation, approaching from the outer system. I've been tracking them all night." Verai's sigh was theatrical. "And Central Command has confirmed these sightings?" "No, they believe it's a malfunction in my equipment. And you disagree with their assessment because I know my equipment," Ezerion said firmly. "The pattern is too consistent for a malfunction. These are directed objects moving with purpose." Verai finally looked up, his expression a practiced blend of patience and condescension. "Sky Watcher Var, do you know how many false alarms the Capitol receives each year from well-meaning citizens who think they've spotted something unusual? Our advanced detection systems are designed specifically to filter out anomalies. With respect, sir, those systems might be too advanced. They're calibrated to ignore anything that doesn't match known patterns. But an actual threat wouldn't announce itself in a familiar way." Verai's eyebrows rose marginally. "An actual threat? From whom?" "Orion has no enemies. We're not a strategic location. We possess no significant natural resources. Who would bother with us?" The question hung in the air, and Ezerion realized he had no good answer. It was true. Orion's very insignificance on the galactic stage had been its greatest protection for centuries. "I don't know," he admitted, "but someone is coming." "Very well," Verai said, in a tone that suggested the conversation was reaching its end. "I'll make a note of your concern. In the meantime, I suggest you return to your post and continue monitoring the situation. If these vessels continue their approach, we'll reevaluate." It was as much of a dismissal as Ezerion was going to get. As he was escorted out of the Capitol building, the frustration burned in his chest. No one was listening. No one remembered what it meant to be cautious. But someone might. The thought struck him as he descended the Capitol steps. There was one person on Orion who might take his concerns seriously, someone whose life's work involved remembering what others had forgotten. Dr. Althea was not what most Orionians pictured when they thought of a historian. Young by academic standards, with bright eyes that sparkled with intelligence and a perpetual expression of curiosity, she had made her reputation by challenging conventional historical narratives. Her specialty was interplanetary relations, particularly the ancient treaties that Orion had once maintained with distant civilizations. Ezra found her in the archives, surrounded by holographic displays of old star charts and treaty documents. She looked up as he approached, recognition dawning on her face. A sky watcher. How fascinating, she said, deactivating the displays with a wave of her hand. I don't think I've ever met one of you in person. There aren't many of us left, Ezra replied, extending his hand. Isiyun var. Dr. Althea, she said, shaking his hand firmly. What brings you to the archives? Most people find my work rather dull. I need information about old alliances. Specifically, any defense treaties Orion might have had with other civilizations. Her eyes widened with interest. Now, that's not a request I get every day. Any particular civilization you're curious about? Ezra hesitated. The human commonwealth. Dr. Althea's expression shifted, a flash of excitement crossing her features. The humans? Now that's fascinating. They were once our strongest allies, before the Great Reconciliation, when Orion still maintained a defense force. She led him deeper into the archives, to a section that seemed rarely visited. The holographic displays here were older, the images flickering occasionally as the ancient data struggled to maintain its integrity. The treaty with the human commonwealth was unique, she explained, pulling up documents that swirled around them in glowing text. Unlike our other alliances, which were primarily trade-based, the human accord included a mutual defense clause. What happened to it? Ezra asked. Officially? Nothing. It was never formally dissolved. As Orion entered its peaceful era and gradually disarmed, most treaties were renegotiated or allowed to expire. But the human treaty had an unusual provision. She manipulated the display, highlighting a section of text. It contained what they called a perpetuity clause. In essence, the treaty remained in effect unless explicitly revoked by both parties. And it never was, not to my knowledge. The Commonwealth eventually expanded beyond our region of space. Communication became less frequent, then ceased altogether. But legally speaking, the treaty should still be valid. Hope stirred in Azirian's chest. So, if Orion were threatened, the humans would be obligated to aid us, Dr. Althea confirmed. In theory, at least. It's been hundreds of years since anyone has had contact with them. How will we even reach them? Our long-range communication technology is primarily academic now, not designed for emergency signals. Dr. Althea's eyes gleamed with excitement. That's where it gets interesting. According to my research, the treaty established a direct communication protocol, an emergency system that would bypass conventional channels. She pulled up another document. It was called the Red Protocol, a direct line to the human fleet to be used only in dire circumstances. And this system still exists? I believe so. Dr. Althea leaned closer, lowering her voice though they were alone in the archives. The treaty stipulated that the technology was to be maintained regardless of other defense reductions. It should be located in the Emergency Command Center beneath the capital. Ezra felt a surge of excitement, followed by immediate doubt. The Emergency Command Center has been converted into a historical museum. I've visited it. There's nothing there but deactivated consoles and informational displays. That's what they want people to think, Dr. Althea said with a small smile. But my research suggests otherwise. The Red Protocol system was designed to be unobtrusive, hidden in plain sight. The treaty was quite specific about that. She pulled up a detailed schematic. Look for this symbol. It would be easy to mistake for a decorative element, but it's actually the access point for the Red Protocol. Ezra studied the symbol, a circular design with a distinctive pattern that indeed could be mistaken for an artistic flourish. And you believe this is still functional? After all this time, the treaty mandated regular maintenance, regardless of political climate, Dr. Althea said. Of course, whether those obligations were actually fulfilled. She shrugged. That's something only a visit to the command center could confirm. Ezarion committed the symbol to memory. Thank you, Doctor. This has been illuminating. May I ask why you're interested in ancient defense protocols? There was no suspicion in her voice, only scholarly curiosity. Ezarion hesitated, then decided that if anyone deserved the truth, it was her. I've detected unidentified vessels approaching our system. No one believes me. They think it's equipment malfunction. But I know what I saw. Instead of dismissing him, Dr. Althea nodded thoughtfully. The universe is vast and largely unknown, despite what our leaders might believe. Orion's peace has been a blessing, but perhaps it has made us complacent. She met his gaze. If you're right, the Red Protocol might be our only hope. And if I'm wrong, I'll have disrupted a museum exhibit for nothing, Ezarion said with a grim smile. Sometimes, Skywatcher Var, it's better to be cautious and wrong than confident and unprepared. She handed him a small data crystal. Take this. It contains all my research on the treaty and the Red Protocol. It might help you locate and activate the system. As Ezarion left the archives, the red dots on his tower's radar weighed heavily on his mind. He had one chance to prepare Orion for whatever was coming. One ancient protocol that might or might not still function. And even if it did, there was no guarantee that anyone would answer. The Historical Museum of Defense, once the Emergency Command Center, was sparsely attended as always. A few elderly Orionians wandered through the exhibits, reminiscing about a time they barely remembered, while the occasional school group moved in clustered formation, more interested in their personal devices than the artifacts of their planet's military past. Ezarion moved through the museum with purpose, scanning the walls and consoles for the symbol Dr. Althea had shown him. Most of the exhibits were exactly as he remembered. Deactivated weapons behind transparent barriers, uniforms displayed on mannequins, and elaborately designed placards explaining the evolution of Orion's defense philosophy toward its current state of enlightened pacifism. He found the symbol in the least visited section of the museum, dedicated to interplanetary alliances. It was etched into the side of what appeared to be a decorative column, exactly as Dr. Althea had described, easily overlooked unless one knew what to seek. Glancing around to ensure he was unobserved, Ezarion pressed his palm against the symbol. Nothing happened. He frowned, wondering if the system had degraded after all, then remembered the data crystal. Inserting it into his personal device, he reviewed Dr. Althea's notes more carefully. The activation sequence required not just physical contact, but a specific pressure pattern. Following the instructions, he pressed the symbol in a clockwise spiral, starting from the center. The column hummed to life, a soft blue light emanating from previously invisible seams. With a near-silent hydraulic whisper, a section of the floor beside the column slid open, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. Ezarion took a deep breath and stepped onto the first stair. The panel closed behind him as soon as he was clear, leaving him in pitch blackness for a moment before dim emergency lighting activated along the stairwell. The descent took him deep beneath the museum into what must have been the true emergency command center. Unlike the museum above, there was nothing decorative or educational about this space. It was purely functional, a circular room with a central console surrounded by darkened screens. As he approached the console, lights flickered to life around the room, illuminating screens that displayed star charts, defense grid schematics, and system diagnostics. Everything was covered in a fine layer of dust, but the equipment itself appeared intact. The central console bore the same symbol, now glowing with a faint red light. Ezarion placed his palm on it, and the system acknowledged him with a soft chime. Orion Defense Protocol activated, announced a synthetic voice. Please state nature of emergency. Unidentified vessels approaching Orion system, Ezarion said, feeling strangely formal. Request activation of the Red Protocol. There was a pause, as if the ancient system was processing his request. Red Protocol requires authorization from planetary leadership or designated emergency authority. Please provide authorization code. Azirian's heart sank. Of course there would be safeguards. He hadn't expected to get this far, let alone activate an interstellar distress call without proper authority. I don't have an authorization code, he admitted to the empty room. But this is an emergency. Orion may be in danger. Insufficient authorization, the system replied dispassionately. Red protocol requires leadership approval. Azirion sat heavily in the dusty command chair, frustration welling up inside him. So close, yet blocked by bureaucracy, even centuries old. He thought of the red dots on his radar, steadily approaching. By the time he convinced someone to take him seriously, it might be too late. System, he tried again. Is there any override procedure for the red protocol in case leadership is unavailable or compromised? Another pause. Emergency override exists for Sky Watch Authority in cases of imminent threat when standard channels of authorization are unavailable. Do you wish to proceed with emergency override? Azirion straightened. Yes. Warning. False activation of red protocol is a breach of interstellar treaty and may result in severe penalties. Confirm emergency override. I confirm emergency override, Azirion said firmly. Activate the red protocol. The room's lighting shifted to a deep red, and the central console reconfigured itself, revealing a physical button, the literal red button of legend, protected by a transparent cover. Red protocol primed, announced the synthetic voice. Final. Activation requires physical confirmation. Once initiated, signal cannot be retracted. Azirion stared at the button, doubts suddenly flooding his mind. What if he was wrong? What if the dots on his radar were truly just a malfunction? He would be sending a distress call to a civilization that might no longer exist for a threat that might not be real. But the alternative was worse. If he was right and did nothing, with a steady hand, he lifted the protective cover and pressed the button. The console hummed, vibrations running through the floor as ancient machinery awakened deep beneath them. Red protocol activated, confirmed the voice. Distress signal broadcasting on Commonwealth emergency frequency. Message. Orion requests immediate assistance under Treaty Article 7. Unidentified vessels approaching. Possible hostile intent. A new screen activated, showing a visualization of the signal racing outward from Orion, directed toward a specific section of the galaxy, the last known location of the human Commonwealth. Estimated response time unknown, the system added. Signal will repeat until acknowledged or manually deactivated. Azirion released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. It was done, for better or worse. He had just sent a desperate plea across the stars, hoping that someone, anyone, still remembered a centuries-old promise. Now what? He asked aloud. Recommended action. Return to monitoring station and maintain surveillance of approaching vessels. Alert command center if vessel behavior changes. It was as good a plan as any. As Azirion ascended the stairs back to the museum, he wondered how long he would have to wait for a response, if one ever came. The answer, as it turned out, was 3 days. For 3 days, Azirion maintained his vigil at the Sky Watch Tower, tracking the approaching vessels as they crossed the outer boundaries of the Orion system. Their trajectory left no doubt now. They were heading directly for the planet, moving with deliberate purpose. Central Command continued to ignore his reports, and his attempts to reach President Narian Rao were repeatedly rebuffed. Only Dr. Althea took his concerns seriously, visiting the tower to examine the radar signals herself. I've cross-referenced these patterns with historical records, she told him on the third day, frowning at the display. They don't match any known commercial or diplomatic approach vectors. They're not trying to announce themselves, Azirion agreed. They're moving like they don't want to be detected, which means they're either being cautious or they have something to hide, Azirion finished. Has there been any response to the red protocol? Dr. Althea shook her head. Nothing I'm aware of. But that doesn't mean the signal wasn't received. The humans were known for their thoroughness. They might be gathering information before responding. If they respond at all, Azirion said grimly. It's been centuries. The Commonwealth was vast, spanning multiple star systems. Even if their civilization has changed, some record of the treaty likely survives. Their conversation was interrupted by a sudden shift in the radar display. The red dots, previously maintaining a steady approach, began to accelerate. Their increasing speed, Ezraion said, hands flying across the console to enhance the image. And changing formation. The vessels were spreading out, taking positions that any military strategist would recognize, an attack formation. I need to contact Central Command again, Ezraion said, reaching for the communication panel. Before he could activate it, the console lit up with an incoming message, not from Central Command, but from a frequency he didn't recognize. The signal strength was unlike anything he had seen before, cutting through Orion's communication network with ease. He accepted the transmission. The screen remained blank, but a voice came through, synthetic, yet somehow distinctly human in its cadence. Attention Orion Skywatch. This is an automated response to Red Protocol activation. Your distress signal has been received and authenticated. Stand by for Commonwealth response. Brace yourself. A human warship is incoming. The transmission ended as abruptly as it had begun, leaving Ezraion and Dr. Althea staring at each other in shocked silence. They heard us, Dr. Althea whispered. They're actually coming. But will they arrive in time? Ezraion turned back to the radar. The unknown vessels were now just hours away from reaching Orion's atmosphere. We need to warn the city. Even if Central Command won't listen, we can at least try to prepare people. I'll contact every news outlet I know, Dr. Althea said, already moving toward the door. And I'll try to reach the president directly. He needs to know that we've activated the Red Protocol, and that someone has answered. As Dr. Althea rushed from the tower, Ezraion remained at his post, eyes fixed on the approaching threat. The human message had been clear, but provided no timeline. Would their warship arrive in hours? Days? Weeks? Orion had no defenses, no military to speak of. If the approaching vessels were hostile, the planet was completely vulnerable. He had done everything he could. Activated an ancient treaty, maintained his watch, tried to warn his people. Now all he could do was wait, and hope that a promise made centuries ago would be honored in time. The morning dawned clear and beautiful on Orion, with no visible sign of the danger approaching from above. Citizens went about their daily routines, blissfully unaware of the vessels now entering high orbit around their planet. Only the increasingly frantic activity at Central Command indicated that something had changed. Ezraion had been summoned, not dismissed or ignored, but officially summoned to an emergency meeting of the planetary leadership. He arrived at the Capitol building to find it in a state of barely controlled chaos. Security personnel, positions that had been largely ceremonial for centuries, now moved with genuine purpose. Government officials hurried through corridors, their expressions ranging from confused to openly frightened. He was escorted directly to the crisis chamber, a room that probably hadn't been used for its intended purpose in generations. President Narayan Rao sat at the head of a long table, surrounded by advisors and department heads. Dr. Althea was there as well, her presence a small comfort in the tense atmosphere. Sky Watcher Var, the president said as Ezraion entered. The usual political polish was gone from his voice, replaced by a strained formality. Understand we owe you an apology. Sir, your warnings were correct. We have confirmed the presence of 7 vessels in orbit around Orion. They are not responding to our communications and have positioned themselves in what our historical advisors tell me is a classic blockade formation. Ezraion glanced at Dr. Althea, who nodded slightly. She had apparently been consulted for her expertise in historical military strategies. Do we know who they are? Ezraion asked. Not with certainty, the president replied, but they bear markings similar to those used by the Drakari coalition. The name sent a chill through the room. The Drakari were not unknown to Orion, though contact had been minimal and centuries passed. They were a warrior culture from a resource-poor region of space, known historically for their territorial expansions and rigid hierarchy. What do they want? Someone asked. As if in answer, The large display at the end of the room activated, showing an incoming transmission request. President Rao nodded to an aide, who accepted the call. The screen filled with the image of a Drakari commander, tall, with scaled skin the color of burnished copper and eyes like polished obsidian. The elaborate armor they wore spoke of rank and accomplishment. "I am War Commander Krogar of the Drakari Coalition," the figure announced without preamble. "Your world is now under Drakari protection. Resistance is unnecessary and would only result in needless suffering." President Rao rose to his feet, visibly struggling to maintain his composure. "This is President Narayan Rao of Orion. We do not understand the nature of this. Protection. Orion has no enemies. We have maintained peaceful relations with all known civilizations for centuries." War Commander Krogar's expression remained impassive. "Your peace is a luxury afforded by ignorance. The galaxy has changed while you resided in your cultural bubble. Resources grow scarce. New powers rise. The Drakari Coalition offers stability in exchange for reasonable tribute." Tribute. The president's voice rose in disbelief. "You're talking about conquest." "I'm talking about reality," Krogar replied coldly. "Your world has no defenses, no allies, no significance beyond the resources we require. Acceptance of our terms will ensure your culture and people survive. Resistance will not be tolerated." "What terms?" President Rao asked, the fight already beginning to drain from his voice. "Immediate transfer of administrative authority to Drakari oversight. Allocation of 30% of your agricultural output and 50% of your mineral resources to the coalition. Implementation of Drakari educational and cultural programs." Krogar paused. "These terms are generous, considering your vulnerability." The room had fallen silent, the planetary leadership confronted with a reality they had never prepared for. Centuries of peace had left them without protocols, without strategies, without any experience in dealing with such a threat. "We need time to consider," President Rao said finally. "You have one planetary rotation," Krogar replied. "After that, we will demonstrate the consequences of hesitation. Be wise, President Rao. Accept the inevitable." The transmission ended, and the room erupted in panicked discussion. Voices overlapped as officials argued about options that didn't exist, proposed resistance they couldn't mount, and suggested diplomatic solutions to a situation that had moved far beyond diplomacy. Ezrayon caught Dr. Althea's eye across the room. She moved to join him, her expression grave but determined. "Did you tell them about the Red Protocol?" he asked quietly. "I tried," she replied. "But with the immediate crisis, they've dismissed it as irrelevant. Even if human help is coming, they argue, it won't arrive in time to prevent the Drakari from making good on their threats." "They're probably right," Ezrayon admitted. "The Commonwealth is presumably far from here, if it still exists at all." He hesitated. "Do you think they know?" "The Drakari?" Dr. Althea considered. "It's possible. If they've been monitoring our communications, they might have detected the Red Protocol signal. But they clearly don't consider it a significant threat, or they're accelerating their timetable because of it." Their conversation was interrupted as President Rao called the room to order. "We need solutions, not panic," he said, his voice steadier now. "What are our options?" No one spoke for a long moment. Then an elderly counselor rose slowly to his feet. "We have no military, no defenses, no weapons. The practical reality is that we have only one option: negotiate the best terms possible and hope that the Drakari honor them." Murmurs of reluctant agreement filled the room. Ezrayon felt his chest tighten with frustration. After all his warnings, after activating the Red Protocol, after receiving confirmation that help was coming, they were still going to surrender without a fight. "There is another option," he said, his voice cutting through the defeatist atmosphere. All eyes turned to him. "We stall." "Stall," President Rao repeated. "For what purpose?" "We've activated the Red Protocol. The human Commonwealth has acknowledged our distress call and indicated they're sending a warship." Skeptical murmurs rippled through the room. but President Rao raised a hand for silence. Dr. Althea mentioned this, but the humans haven't been seen in this sector for centuries. Even if they're coming, they won't arrive before the Drakari deadline. We don't know that, Ezraion insisted. The message said a warship is incoming, but gave no timeline. Human technology was always advanced, especially their propulsion systems. So your suggestion is to risk Drakari retaliation on the slim hope that a long-lost ally might arrive in time. The president's tone made clear how unlikely he considered this scenario. My suggestion is to buy time, Ezraion replied firmly. Ask for clarification of terms. Request cultural exemptions. Propose alternative resource allocations. Anything to extend the negotiations while we wait for Commonwealth response. And if no response comes, another counselor asked. Then we're no worse off than we are now, Dr. Althea interjected. The Drakari clearly intend to occupy Orion regardless of our cooperation. At least this way, we maintain hope. President Rao considered, then slowly nodded. Very well. We will attempt to extend negotiations. But be realistic. We may have no choice but to accept their terms in the end. As the council turned to drafting their response to the Drakari, Ezraion felt a small sense of victory. It wasn't much, but it was something. A chance, however slim, that the ancient alliance might yet save Orion. But as the day progressed, that hope began to fade. The Drakari commander grew increasingly impatient with Orion's attempts to extend discussions. By nightfall, they had issued a final ultimatum: accept Drakari authority by morning or face instructive consequences. The night that followed was the longest of Azirion's life. He returned to his tower, not because he was ordered to, but because it was where he felt most useful. From his vantage point, he could watch both the stars above and the city below. The capital remained eerily calm, most citizens still unaware of the threat hovering above them. The government had decided against a planet-wide announcement, fearing panic would only make the situation worse. As midnight approached, Azirion's radar detected movement. The Drakari vessels were repositioning, moving into what appeared to be a strike formation. They're not waiting until morning, he whispered to himself, reaching for the communication panel to alert the crisis chamber. Before he could send the warning, a new alert sounded, a signal unlike anything he'd ever heard before. The radar display flickered, then reconfigured to show a new reading at the edge of the system. Something was coming, something massive, and it was moving at a speed that should have been impossible. The crisis chamber was in continuous session when Azirion's urgent message arrived. President Rao read it with growing alarm, then passed it to his advisors. The Drakari are moving into attack position, he announced to the room. And there's something else. Another ship entering the system at extreme velocity. The humans? Dr. Althea asked, hope evident in her voice. Impossible to confirm, the president replied. But whatever it is, it's like nothing in our records. As if in response to this development, the communication system activated once more. War Commander Krogar's face appeared on the display, his expression now openly hostile. Your attempts at delay have exhausted my patience, the Drakari commander announced. It seems a demonstration is required to clarify your situation. Wait, President Rao urged. We were preparing our response. There's no need for. There is every need, Krogar interrupted. You believe someone is coming to save you. They are not. Observe what happens to those who defy the Drakari coalition. The transmission shifted to an external view, showing one of the Drakari vessels moving into position above a rural settlement on Orion's northern continent. A beam of energy lanced downward from the ship, striking the center of the settlement. The impact was precise, destroying several buildings but deliberately leaving the surrounding structures intact. The message was clear. This was not an accident or a test. It was a controlled demonstration of power. The transmission returned to Krogar's impassive face. That was an uninhabited research outpost, he stated. The next target will be populated. You have until dawn to acknowledge Drakari authority. There will be no further extensions. As the transmission ended, the crisis chamber erupted in panic. Reports flooded in confirming the attack, though thankfully verifying that the research station had indeed been evacuated months earlier as part of a budget reduction. "We have no choice," a counselor said, her voice shaking. "We must surrender." President Narayan Rao slumped in his chair, the weight of an entire planet's future heavy on his shoulders. "Is there any update on the unidentified ship?" An aide consulted a datapad. "Still approaching at extreme velocity, sir. Current trajectory suggests it will reach Orion orbit in approximately 3 hours." "Too late," someone muttered. "Dawn is in 2 hours." Dr. Althea stepped forward. "The Drakari know something is coming. That's why they're accelerating their timeline. They're afraid." "Afraid or not, they have 7 warships in orbit," President Rao replied wearily. "What difference can one ship make, even if it is human?" "The difference between freedom and subjugation," Ezarion said firmly. He had remained silent until now, watching the proceedings with growing tension. The humans were legendary for their military technology, even centuries ago, and they've had hundreds of years to advance further. "Legends and history won't save us from present reality," the president said. "I cannot risk the lives of our citizens on ancient myths about human warships." "Then give them what they want," Ezarion suggested, a plan forming in his mind. "Just not quite yet." "Explain," President Rao said, eyebrows raised. "Tell the Drakari you're preparing a formal surrender ceremony for Dawn. That you're gathering the planetary leadership to sign the treaty in person as a show of respect for Drakari traditions. Ask them to send representatives to the Capitol Plaza to receive your submission properly." "And the purpose of this charade?" the president asked, though understanding was beginning to dawn in his eyes. "Time," Ezarion said simply. 3 hours. That's all we need." For the first time since the crisis began, a flicker of hope appeared on President Rao's face. He straightened in his chair, some of his natural authority returning. "Very well. We will proceed with Sky Watcher Var's suggestion. Prepare a communication to War Commander Krogar." The Drakari response came swiftly. They accepted the ceremonial surrender, whether out of cultural appreciation for formality or simple arrogance. War Commander Krogar himself would descend to the Capitol Plaza at dawn to accept Orion's submission and establish Drakari governance. As preparations for this ceremony began, Ezarion returned once more to his tower. The mysterious ship was still approaching, now clearly visible on his instruments, though still too distant for detailed analysis. All he could determine was that it was singular, massive, and moving with impossible speed directly toward Orion. Dr. Althea joined him in the tower as the night grew old, the two of them watching the approach of what they desperately hoped was salvation. "Do you think it's really them?" she asked softly. "The humans?" "The message said a warship was incoming," Ezarion replied. "I have to believe they kept their word, even after all this time, especially after all this time." He turned to look at her. "Treaties and promises are easy to keep when they cost nothing. It's when they demand sacrifice that they truly matter." As dawn approached, the Capitol Plaza was prepared for the ceremony. A platform had been erected, and the planetary leadership gathered with appropriate gravity. Citizens had begun to assemble as well, curious about the unusual proceedings. The government had still revealed nothing about the Drakari threat, maintaining the fiction that this was a diplomatic welcome for a newly discovered civilization. Ezarion and Dr. Althea stood at the edge of the plaza, watching the sky anxiously. Both the Drakari and the mysterious ship were now less than 30 minutes away. "It's going to be close," Dr. Althea murmured. Ezarion nodded, not trusting himself to speak. The weight of what might happen, what would happen if he was wrong, pressed down upon him like a physical force. The first light of dawn touched the capital's crystalline spires just as a Drakari shuttle descended from clouds. It landed with military precision at the far end of the plaza, its engines throwing dust into the crisp morning air. The crowd murmured in surprise and uncertainty. These were not the elegant diplomatic vessels they were accustomed to seeing. This was clearly a military craft, all sharp angles and weapon mounts. The shuttle's hatch opened, and War Commander Krogar emerged, flanked by armored Drakari soldiers. The commander's armor gleamed in the morning light, intricate patterns etched into its coppery surface, depicting what were presumably past victories. The soldiers formed a precise formation around him as he strode toward the platform where President Rao waited. Izirian's eyes darted between the approaching Drakari and the sky above. Where was the human ship? Had he miscalculated? Had the Red Protocol failed after all? War Commander Krogar ascended the platform, towering over President Rao. His soldiers spread out, taking strategic positions around the plaza. The citizens of Orion, finally sensing that something was very wrong, began to shift nervously. President Narayan Rao. Krogar's voice boomed across the plaza. Are you prepared to acknowledge Drakari authority over Orion? President Rao glanced briefly toward Ezarian, then back to the Drakari commander. War Commander Krogar, before we proceed, there is a matter of... He was interrupted by a sound like thunder rolling across the sky. The air itself seemed to vibrate, and a shadow fell over the plaza. Every eye turned upward as a ship, impossibly vast, materialized above the capital. It seemed to phase into existence rather than arrive, as if space itself had parted to allow its passage. It was like nothing Orion had ever seen. Where Drakari vessels were angular and aggressive, this ship was sleek and curved, its hull the color of burnished steel with pulsing blue lines that suggested immense power barely contained. It dwarfed the Drakari vessels still in orbit, visible now as mere specks against the dawn sky. What is this? Krogar demanded, his composure cracking for the first time. He raised a communication device to his mouth, barking orders in the Drakari language. Before anyone could respond, the air before the platform shimmered, and a figure appeared, not arriving physically but manifesting through some advanced form of projection. The hologram was so perfect it seemed solid, showing a human woman in a uniform of midnight blue with silver trim. Her dark hair was pulled back tightly, and her expression was one of calm authority. I am Captain Alaridalia of the Human Commonwealth Warship Peacekeeper, the figure announced, her voice carrying easily across the now silent plaza. This planet is under Commonwealth protection according to Treaty Article 7, ratified in perpetuity between our peoples. War Commander Krogar stepped forward, his hand moving to the weapon at his side. This world is claimed by the Drakari Coalition. Your intervention is unwelcome and will be considered an act of war. Captain Dahlia's hologram turned to face him, her expression unchanging. War Commander Krogar of the Drakari Coalition, your vessels have committed an act of aggression against a protected world. You will withdraw immediately or face the consequences. A laugh erupted from Krogar, harsh and dismissive. You are one ship. We are 7. The mathematics of this situation should be clear, even to humans. Mathematics? Captain Dahlia repeated thoughtfully. Very well. Let me offer you some calculations. She raised her hand, and the hologram expanded to include a tactical display showing the Drakari vessels in orbit. As they watched, targeting markers appeared on each ship. Your vessels are now locked by our weapons systems, she explained calmly. Your shields, impressive by regional standards, cannot withstand Commonwealth armaments. Your engines, currently charging for what I assume is either an attack run or a retreat, will not reach full power before we can disable them. She paused, allowing this information to sink in. Those are the mathematics of your situation, War Commander. Now I offer you an equation with a different solution. Withdraw your forces from Orion space immediately, and we will consider this a misunderstanding rather than an act of war against the Commonwealth. Krogar's scaled face darkened with rage. This is a bluff. One ship cannot. He was interrupted by a communication from his device, urgent voices speaking rapidly in the Drakari language. His expression shifted from anger to shock. Captain Dahlia waited patiently. When Krogar looked up again, something had changed in his demeanor. We will withdraw, he said finally, the words clearly difficult for him. But know this, human, the Drakari Coalition does not forget. This world may be beyond our reach today, but circumstances change. Indeed they do, Captain Dahlia agreed pleasantly. And the Commonwealth remembers as well. This sector is once again under our active protection. I suggest your coalition adjusts its expansion plans accordingly." Without another word, Krogar signaled to his soldiers. They retreated to their shuttle with military precision, though their previously intimidating presence now seemed diminished beneath the shadow of the human warship. As the Drakari shuttle ascended, the citizens of Orion watched in confusion and wonder. President Rao stepped forward to address Captain Dahlia's hologram. "Captain, on behalf of Orion, I extend our deepest gratitude. You have saved our world from certain subjugation. We responded to the Red Protocol as our treaty obligations require," Captain Dahlia replied. "Though I admit, we were surprised to receive it after so long." "The credit belongs to Sky Watcher Ezrayan Var," the president said, gesturing toward Ezrayan, who stood frozen in disbelief at the edge of the plaza. "Without his persistence, we would never have activated the Red Protocol." Captain Dahlia's hologram turned toward Ezrayan, and he felt a strange sensation as her gaze settled on him, as if she were truly present rather than a projection from orbit. "Sky Watcher Var," she said, "the Commonwealth recognizes your service. You honored a duty that others had forgotten, and in doing so, preserved your world's freedom." Ezrayan found himself unable to speak, overwhelmed by the realization that everything he had hoped for had come to pass. Dr. Althea stepped forward beside him. "Captain Dahlia," she called, "I am Dr. Althea, historian of interplanetary relations. May I ask, why did the Commonwealth withdraw from this sector centuries ago? And why have you returned now?" The captain's expression softened slightly. "A fair question, Doctor. The Commonwealth underwent a period of internal reorganization. Our borders contracted as we focused on core systems. But we never abrogated our treaties. When the Red Protocol signal reached us, it was routed through automated systems that have maintained their vigilance for centuries." She looked up at the sky, where the Drakari vessels could be seen accelerating away from Orion. "As for why we've returned now, the galaxy is changing. Powers like the Drakari Coalition have expanded into vacuums left by our absence. The Commonwealth has stabilized and is reclaiming its role in galactic affairs." Her gaze returned to the assembled Orionians. "We have been remiss in our duties to allied worlds. That oversight is being corrected." President Rao stepped forward again. "Does this mean the Commonwealth is reestablishing a presence in our sector?" "It does," Captain Dahlia confirmed. "The Peacekeeper will remain in your system temporarily while we establish more permanent arrangements. If Orion is amenable, we would propose updating our ancient treaty to reflect current realities." "We would be honored," President Rao said quickly, relief evident in his voice. Captain Dahlia nodded. "Then I shall transport to the surface for formal discussions once the Drakari have fully withdrawn from your system." She turned to Ezrayan once more. "Sky Watcher Var, your vigilance honors the finest traditions of both our peoples. The Commonwealth acknowledges its debt to you." With that, her hologram shimmered and vanished, leaving the plaza in a state of stunned silence. Above, the massive human warship remained, its presence both protection and promise. Slowly, realization spread through the gathered citizens. Something momentous had occurred. A threat they hadn't known existed had been averted, and an alliance from legend had materialized before their eyes. Murmurs became conversations, then jubilant exclamations as the news spread. Ezrayan felt a hand on his shoulder and turned to find President Rao standing beside him. "Sky Watcher Var," the president said, genuine humility in his voice. "Orion owes you an apology, and a debt we can never fully repay." "I was just doing my duty, Mr. President," Ezrayan replied, the words feeling inadequate for the emotions swirling within him. A duty many of us had forgotten the importance of. President Rao acknowledged. "That will change. The Sky Watch will be reinstated to its proper role. We've learned a harsh lesson about the value of vigilance." Dr. Althea joined them, her eyes bright with excitement. "This is an unprecedented opportunity," she said. "The return of the Commonwealth after centuries of absence. The historical implications alone are staggering. More than historical, Ezarion said thoughtfully, looking up at the human warship that dominated the sky. I think Orion's future has just changed as well. In the days that followed, formal diplomatic relations were established between Orion and the human Commonwealth. Captain Dahlia transported to the surface with a delegation of Commonwealth officials, their advanced technology and confidence bearing a stark reminder of how isolated Orion had become. The ancient treaty was updated and expanded, formalizing Commonwealth protection while offering Orion access to technology, trade networks, and cultural exchanges that had been lost for centuries. The terms were generous. The humans seemed genuinely pleased to reconnect with their old allies. Ezarion Var found himself unexpectedly at the center of these historic events. As the Sky Watcher who had activated the Red Protocol, he was invited to participate in the diplomatic proceedings and honored with Orion's highest civilian commendation. But more satisfying than any recognition was the knowledge that his faith had been vindicated. The duty he had performed, seemingly meaningless for so long, had saved his world. The ancient systems, the forgotten protocols, the outdated equipment, all had served their purpose when needed most. 1 month after the Drakari withdrawal, Ezarion returned to his tower for the night shift. The Sky Watch had been revitalized, with new recruits in training and modern equipment being installed alongside the historical systems that had proven their worth. As he gazed out at the stars, Ezarion no longer felt the isolation that had once defined his post. The 3 moons of Orion still hung in the sky, but now they were joined by the distant lights of Commonwealth ships patrolling the system, a visible reminder that Orion was alone no longer. Dr. Althea visited him often, their shared experience having forged a bond that transcended professional courtesy. She had been appointed as liaison to the Commonwealth Historical Division, tasked with reconstructing the full narrative of Orion-human relations. "It's remarkable how quickly things can change," she said one evening as they watched a Commonwealth shuttle ascending toward the Peacekeeper. "A month ago, most people couldn't have told you what the Red Protocol was. Now it's being taught in schools across the planet. People adapt," Ezarion replied. "They're already beginning to take the Commonwealth presence for granted." "Not everyone," Dr. Althea said, giving him a pointed look. "Some of us remember how close we came to losing everything." Ezarion nodded, his hand unconsciously touching the communication panel, a gesture that had once been performed with resignation, but now carried a sense of purpose. "The Drakari will return one day," he said quietly. "Perhaps not next year or even next decade, but eventually. And when they do, Orion won't be standing alone," Dr. Althea reminded him. "The Commonwealth kept a promise made centuries ago. That kind of loyalty doesn't fade easily." Ezarion smiled, thinking of Captain Dahlia's words about treaties being honored even after centuries. "No, it doesn't, and neither does duty." As the night deepened around them, Ezarion continued his watch, scanning the stars with renewed vigilance. The weight of responsibility no longer felt like a burden, but a privilege. The privilege of standing guard over a world that had rediscovered its place in a vast and sometimes dangerous galaxy. And above them, the human warship Peacekeeper maintained its own vigilant watch, a steadfast sentinel against the darkness. Proof that some promises, no matter how ancient, were made to be kept.